I never once believed my son's wife would stand in my own kitchen, under the light fixture my husband wired with his own hands, and tell me, "You're a guest in this house now, Vivian." But Sloane said it. She said it in the same voice she used to order coffee. My son Trevor stood 4 feet away with his hands flat on the counter, studying the grain of a butcher block his father had planed by hand, and he did not look up. My granddaughter Amani was on the stairs with her backpack still on one shoulder, 16 years old, and holding her breath. And on the kitchen table sat a folder that a man named Kyle Brantley had left there that morning, with a sticky note on the front that said "Sign where it's flagged." I looked at the folder. Then I looked at the wall where Marcus's photograph used to hang and didn't anymore. And I said, "Sloane, sit down. There's something about this house that Trevor never learned, because I never thought he'd need to know it." Before I tell you what happened after that, please take a moment to hit like on this story, and subscribe if you believe that a woman who spent her whole life taking care of other people deserves to be taken care of at the end of it. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done, standing in your own kitchen, being called a guest? Also, let me know where you're watching from, and what time it is where you are. I read every single one, and I mean that. My name is Vivian Carter. I'm 71 years old. For 38 years I was a nurse at Memorial Health in Savannah, 22 of those as charge nurse on the surgical floor. And I want you to understand something about that job before you hear the rest of this. A nurse doesn't argue. A nurse observes. A nurse writes down the time, the dose, the response, and the exact words the patient said. And she does it whether or not anybody ever reads it. 38 years of that gets into your bones. It saved my life. Not in the way you'd think. House sits on Bellhaven Street, in a part of Savannah that tourists don't drive through unless they've made a wrong turn. It isn't grand. 2 stories, gray clapboard, a porch that sags a little on the left side no matter how many times we shimmed it. There's a live oak in the front yard older than the house, dripping Spanish moss like it's tired, and in August the gnats will eat you alive out there. Behind the house is a detached shop with a tin roof, and that shop is really the whole story. Marcus Carter taught woodshop at Bartlett Middle for 31 years. He was not a big man. He had reading glasses he was always losing, and a laugh that came out of him in one syllable, like a door closing. When we bought the house in 1979, the previous owner had let a grease fire go through the back kitchen, and the whole rear wall was char. Everybody told us to walk away. Marcus stood in the middle of that scorched room, ran his thumb down a stud, and said, "Baby, the bones are good." Fire didn't touch the bones. He rebuilt that wall himself over 11 weekends. He rebuilt the back steps twice. He built the desk that sits in my bedroom now, and the dining table, and the bed frame, and the little step stool Trevor used to stand on to brush his teeth, which I still have, and which I have never once been able to throw away. Money was tight in a way young people don't quite believe when you describe it. Teachers in Georgia didn't make anything then, and don't make much now. I picked up doubles. I picked up holidays. I worked Christmas Day 9 years running, because holiday pay was time and a half, and Trevor wanted a bicycle, and then a trumpet, and then Georgia Southern. Marcus took summer work at a cabinet shop on Waters Avenue. We paid that mortgage off in 2004, and we sat on the porch with a bottle of Andre champagne that cost $8, and we cried like fools, and Marcus said, "Nobody can take this from us now." He was wrong about that, and he knew it. That's the part that matters. Because about 3 years before he died, Marcus started doing something strange. He'd disappear on Thursday afternoons and come back quiet. He met with our accountant, Ruth Delgado, who'd done our taxes since 1991, and who Marcus trusted more than he trusted most preachers. He met with an attorney downtown. When I asked, he'd say, "Just tidying things. I was working 60 hours a week, and my mother was dying in Macon, and I let it go. God forgive me, I let it go." Then came February of 2021. He was in the shop. He'd been sanding a jewelry box for our daughter Denise's 40th birthday. Amani found him on the floor. Massive stroke. He lived 9 more days, and for 6 of those days he could not speak. On the 7th day, he could. Not well. Half his face was gone slack, and the words came out sideways. And the nurses, my people, that's the mercy of it, gave us the room and shut the door. He said my name. Then he said, "Don't sign." I thought he was confused. I told him to rest. He gripped my wrist. Marcus Carter had a carpenter's hands and even ruined he had strengthened them. He said it again. "Don't sign anything. Not for Trevor. Not for anybody." I said, "Marcus, honey, nobody's asking me to sign anything." And he said, "They will." That was Tuesday. He died Friday morning at 4:15 a.m. I know because I charted it, out of habit, on the back of a parking receipt. For 2 years I lived in that house alone, and I was not okay, and I was not okay. I went to First African on Sundays. I watered the fern on the porch. I did not go into the shop because the shop still smelled like him, cedar and mineral spirits, and the ghost of Big Red Gum, and I could not take it. Trevor called on Sundays. Denise called less. She's in Charlotte. She's got her own too, and she and I have a way of loving each other from a distance that works for us as long as neither of us examines it. Then last April, Trevor called on a Wednesday. Ma, Sloane got laid off. Sloane worked in commercial lending. 15 years. She wore blazers to the grocery store. I had never once seen that woman look uncertain, and when they came for dinner that Sunday she looked uncertain, and I felt sorry for her. And that is the feeling I want you to hold on to, because everything that happened later grew out of it. Trevor said the lease on their place in Pooler was up in June. He said 6 months. He said, "Just till she lands somewhere." I said yes before he finished the sentence. I want to be honest about that. Nobody tricked me. I opened the door because a mother's arms open before her brain catches up, and I would do it again, and that is exactly the problem. They moved in the second week of June, in that Savannah heat that makes the air look like water. Here is how it went. I'm going to tell you in order because order matters. A nurse charts in order. The first week, the photographs on the mantel changed. Sloane rearranged them. So it flows. Marcus's picture, the one from the retirement dinner, him holding that ridiculous plaque, laughing his one-syllable laugh, ended up on the little table by the coat closet, facing the wall of the stairwell. In its place, Trevor, Sloane, Imani, all in white shirts on Tybee Island, professionally lit. I said, "That's a nice picture," she said. "It photographs better in the center." The second week, Sloane asked if she could get the shop cleaned out. She said there were spiders. She said Imani could use a workout space, that the girl needed somewhere to do her volleyball conditioning. Trevor carried the boxes. My son carried his own father's tools out of his father's shop and stacked them under a tarp beside the AC unit, and he didn't look at me while he did it, and I said nothing. I have never been good at saying nothing. I got very good at it that summer. The third week, I found the listing. I don't get on Facebook much, but Imani had shown me how to see the neighborhood group because there'd been a stray dog. And there, in Marketplace, was a photograph of a Stanley No. 4-hand plane with a rosewood tote. Marcus had rehabbed that plane the winter I had my knee done. He'd sat in the recliner beside me for 2 weeks, with a rag and a can of Evapo Rust. The listing said estate clean out, no reasonable offer refused. There were 11 other listings under the same name. Chisels, a block plane, a set of marking gauges, and the router table he had built. I stood in my own kitchen with my reading glasses pushed up on my head, and I could hear my pulse in my ears. 38 years of codes, of hemorrhages, of a boy from Hunter Army Airfield bleeding out on my table. And I never once felt what I felt looking at that phone. I said, "Sloane." The plane in the picture. That was Marcus's. She was making a smoothie. She didn't turn the blender off right away. Then she said, "Vivian, they were rusting. I'm doing you a favor. That whole shop is a liability. If somebody breaks in there and gets hurt, they can sue you." Trevor came in from the garage. Sloane said, "Your mother's upset about the tools." And Trevor, my son, 42 years old, whose father taught him to sharpen a chisel on a Sunday morning before church, who cried at that man's funeral until he could not stand. My son looked at the floor and said, "Ma, they're just tools." That's the sentence. If you take one thing from this story, take that sentence, because it's the sound a family makes when it starts to come apart. Not screaming, just somebody saying it's just about a thing that was never just. I went upstairs and sat on the edge of the bed Marcus built, and I did the only thing I knew how to do. I got a spiral notebook out of the nightstand, and on the first line I wrote, June 27, 4:40 p.m. 11 of M's tools listed for sale online without my knowledge. Sloane stated the shop is a liability. Trevor present. Trevor said, they're just tools. I looked at that for a long time. Then I wrote the date at the top of the next page, and I have not stopped since. In July, they moved me downstairs. Sloane brought it up at dinner, gently, holding my hand across the table. She'd read that falls are the #1 cause of death for women my age. She'd read that hip fractures have a mortality rate. She said the back den had its own bathroom, and wouldn't it be so much easier? I told her that I spent 38 years in a hospital, and I am aware of the statistics on hip fractures. I told her I climb those stairs 8 times a day, and I'll keep climbing them. She smiled and said, "Of course." 2 weeks later, my bedroom furniture was in the den. Trevor had done it while I was at my Tuesday women's group. He said he was surprising me. He said Sloane had picked out a new comforter. It was gray. The room where I slept beside my husband for 43 years became Sloane's home office. In August, the cameras went up. 2 outside, which I didn't mind, and 1 in the hallway, aimed at the door of the den. "For your safety," she said. "If you fall in the night, I'll know." I asked her to move it. She said she would. It stayed. And that same month, Harold Ellis flagged me down at the mailbox. Harold has lived across Bellhaven since 1988. He's 82, a retired diesel mechanic. And he's got macular degeneration so bad he can't read a newspaper. But that man hears everything, and he remembers everything, and his mind is a bear trap. "Viv," he said. "Who's the woman?" "That's my daughter-in-law, Harold." He nodded slowly. She asked me what the Duncans got for their place. The Duncans had sold 2 houses down that spring. I felt my stomach drop about an inch. "She's in real estate lending," I said. "She's curious." Harold turned his face toward the sound of my voice, which is how he looks at you now. "She asked me twice," he said. "Second time she asked what your house would go for, and she didn't ask like a woman who was curious. She asked like a woman who was calculating." That night, I called an attorney's office out of the phone book. I made an appointment for that Friday. I told nobody. Friday morning, my car keys weren't on the hook by the door. Sloane found them, eventually, in the pocket of a coat in the front closet, and she held them up and she said, "Vivian, this is what I've been trying to talk to Trevor about." That was the first time she said it. It got easier for her after that. Over the next month, she said it in front of Imani, and she said it on the phone to Denise, and she said it to Trevor in a low voice at the kitchen table when they thought I was in the den. She's confused. She's slipping. She hides things and then forgets she hid them. And here is the cruelty of it. The part I could not explain to anyone. The part that made me lie awake at 3 in the morning. After 4 or 5 weeks of a woman telling everyone in your house that you're losing your mind, you start looking for evidence yourself. You misplace your glasses and your whole chest goes cold. You forget the word for colander and you sit down on the kitchen floor. I never made it to that attorney. I canceled the appointment because I was ashamed. I thought, what if she's right now? In late September, there was a dinner. Sloane had a friend from her old bank coming, a man named Kyle Brantley, who does mortgage work, and she wanted to make an impression. She told me not to lift a finger, so of course I baked buttermilk pound cake, the one from my grandmother, the one Marcus called church cake because it made the whole house smell like a Sunday. 2 hours. I did the lemon glaze at the end the way you're supposed to, while it's still warm. Sloane came in, saw it cooling on the rack, and her face did something small and quick before she caught it. "Oh," she said, "I ordered dessert. There's room for 2 desserts. Vivian, I got a tart from the place on Whitaker. It's..." She searched for the word and found the one that has stayed with me for the rest of my life. "It's more currant." The pound cake went on the counter beside the coffee maker, uncut, and the tart went on the dining table on a cake stand I didn't know we owned. Somebody's husband asked, later in the evening, whose cake that was over there, and Sloane laughed and said, "Oh, that's Vivian's," she insisted. I stood in my kitchen doorway, in my good navy dress, and I watched my son laugh at a joke a stranger made, and I understood that I had become a piece of furniture that occasionally spoke. That was also the night Kyle Brantley shook my hand too long and asked me if I'd ever thought about unlocking the equity you've got sitting here. I said, "Excuse me?" And Sloane put her hand on my shoulder and said brightly, "Kyle, don't. She gets overwhelmed." Imani heard that. I know she did, because she came into the den at 11 that night, and she sat on the floor with her back against my bed the way she used to when she was 6, and she said, "Grandma, you're not overwhelmed." I said, "No, baby, I'm not." She was quiet a while. Then, she said, "Mom's been in your desk." I went cold. "Which desk?" "The one Grandpa made. In the room that's her office now." She had the drawers out. I didn't sleep. At 4:30 in the morning I went up those stairs I'm not supposed to climb, and I stood in the room where I used to sleep, and I turned on the little lamp. Marcus built that desk in 1996, quarter-sawn white oak, hand-cut dovetails, because he said machine-cut dovetails were a lie you tell your grandchildren. There's a shallow drawer under the writing surface, and the drawer has a false back. He showed me that when he gave it to me, and he said, "For your important foolishness," and I had used it for exactly one thing in 25 years, which was a lock of Trevor's baby hair. The lock of hair was still there, and behind it, taped flat against the false back, was a small brass key. And on the raw wood of the drawer's underside, where nobody would ever look, in letters cut with a chisel, deep and careful and slow, my husband had carved, "V. Don't sign. Call Ruth. M." I sat down on the floor of that room in my nightgown, and I put both hands over my mouth, and I made a sound I hope none of you ever have to make. He carved it before the stroke. Months before, maybe years. He had known. Ruth Delgado picked up on the second ring at 7 in the morning. I said, "Ruth, it's Vivian Carter." There was a pause. Then, very carefully, she said, "Vivian, are you at home right now?" "Yes." "Is anyone else in the house?" I looked at the closed door. "Yes." Her voice changed. 30 years of doing our taxes, and I had never heard Ruth Delgado sound like that. "Then don't say another word to me on this phone," she said. "Can you get to my office tomorrow morning without telling them where you're going?" "Ruth, what is this?" And she said, "It's the thing Marcus asked me never to tell you unless you called first." Ruth's office is above a print shop on Abercorn, up a flight of stairs with a runner that's been worn through since the Clinton administration. She's 74, 5 feet, nothing. And she came around her desk and held both my hands before she said anything at all. Then she opened a leather folder and laid it out for me, and I'm going to tell you what she told me. Because the whole reason I'm telling this story to strangers on the internet is that somebody needs to hear it before it's too late, instead of after. In 2018, Marcus put the house on Bellhaven Street into an irrevocable trust. I did not own that house. I hadn't owned it in 5 years. The trust owned it, and I was the lifetime beneficiary, which meant I had the legal right to live in that house until the day I died, and nobody on this earth could remove me from it. But I could not sell it. I could not mortgage it. I could not borrow a nickel against it. I could not sign it over to anyone, for love or guilt or fear. Ruth said, "Vivian, look at me. Even if someone put a pen in your hand and stood behind you while you signed, the signature would be worthless. That's what irrevocable means." He built it that way on purpose. The successor trustee, the only human being with the authority to move that property, was Ruth Delgado. "And a durable power of attorney," she explained, "only lets someone act on your behalf. It gives them your hand. It doesn't give them the trust's hand." Whoever had been planning to walk me into an office with a power of attorney and come out the owner of that house had built their entire plan on a foundation that didn't exist. I sat there and I thought about a man sanding a jewelry box in a shop with a tin roof. I said, "Why didn't he tell me?" Ruth took her glasses off. "Because he said if you knew, you'd tell Trevor." And he said, "Ruth, my wife would give that boy the roof off her head and call it love." I cried in that office for 11 minutes. Ruth timed it, in the way of an old friend, and then she pushed a box of tissues across and got practical. She said, "Freeze your credit, all 3 bureaus, today." She wrote down the numbers. She said, "Pull your credit report. It's free once a year at annualcreditreport.com, and most people my age have never done it once in their lives." She said, "Keep charting. Every incident, date, time, exact words, who was present." She said, "A spiral notebook in your own handwriting is worth more than you think." She said, "Don't confront anyone. Don't warn anyone. People who believe they've already won will hand you the rope." And she said one more thing. She said, "Vivian, you're going to be told you're not competent. It's the oldest move there is. So we're going to make that argument impossible before they ever make it." 2 days later, I sat in Patrice Okafor's office. Patrice was a resident on my floor in 1997, and I once covered for her when she fell asleep standing up in a supply closet. She's a hospitalist now. She ran a full cognitive workup on me, mocha, the whole battery, and she wrote a letter, on letterhead, and she scheduled me to repeat it in 3 months, and again in 6, and she said, "Miss Vivian, I'd like to seize the person who tries." The credit report came back in 9 days. There was a home equity line of credit application in my name, submitted in July, using my social security number and a copy of my Georgia driver's license. It had been denied. It had been denied because the property records showed the title was held by the Carter Family Trust, and the applicant could not produce trustee authorization. The loan officer of record was Kyle Brantley. Now here is the part where a lot of people think I should have called the police that afternoon, and I understand that, and there were nights I thought so too. But you have to understand who was still asleep upstairs in the room where my husband died. My son. And his daughter. I needed Trevor to see it. Not to be told. To see it. October was long. I made grits. I went to church. I asked Sloane about her job search, and she said things were in motion. Kyle Brantley came by twice more with a folder. Once he left it on the table with a sticky note, and I photographed every page in the bathroom with the door locked. My hands shaking so bad the first 4 came out blurred. They wanted a quitclaim deed transferring the property to Trevor and Sloane jointly, plus a durable power of attorney naming Sloane. The stated purpose, written right there in Kyle Brantley's handwriting, was Medicaid planning, roof. I want to tell you about the second Tuesday in October, because that's the day the whole thing stopped being about a house. Trevor found me in the shop. I'd started going out there again. Sweeping. The dumbbells were in there, and a rubber mat, and my husband's pegboard with the outlines of his tools still painted on it, holding nothing. He stood in the doorway a long time. Then he said, "Ma, can I ask you something and you not get mad?" "Ask." "Do you know why I stopped coming home?" I put the broom down. He said, "Every time I came in this house, somebody told me what it cost." I didn't understand him and I said so. "Not on purpose," he said. "Not, Ma. I know you didn't do it on purpose, but it was every visit. Your daddy took a second job for that trumpet. I worked 9 Christmases. We ate beans that year, Trevor, so you could go." He laughed and it was an awful sound. "You said it like a love song. I heard it like an invoice." I stood in my husband's shop and could not breathe. "I got my degree," he said, "and I made money, and I bought Sloane a ring that was too expensive, and I bought a house in Pooler I couldn't afford, and every time something went right, the first thing I felt wasn't proud. It was now it was worth it. And every time something went wrong." He stopped. His mouth was doing the thing his father's mouth did. "Every time something went wrong, it was like I'd wasted your whole life. And Lord help me, my first instinct, my very first instinct, standing there, was to say, 'How dare you?' To say, 'Do you know what I gave?' Which would have proved his entire point, in one sentence, forever. So I didn't. I have never done anything harder. I said, 'Trevor, do you remember the plane?' He blinked. 'The what?' "The little block plane. You were 9. Your daddy sat you on that stool and put your hands on it, and you took a shaving off a piece of poplar, and it came off in one curl and it hit the floor." His eyes changed. "You picked it up," I said, "and you carried that wood shaving around in your pocket for 3 weeks until it crumbled. You wouldn't let me wash those jeans." He was crying, my grown son. "He never once told you what it cost him to teach you that," I said. "And it cost him. He was tired, Trevor, he was so tired, but he never handed you the bill." I took a breath and it hurt, and I did. "I handed you the bill. Over and over, and I called it love. And baby, I am sorry." He put his hand on the pegboard on the empty outline of a hand plane, and he didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "Ma, Sloane's been telling me you're not well." "I know. She said you gave your car keys away and forgot." "I know what she said." He looked at me, really looked, for the first time in a year and a half, and he said, "You look fine to me." That is all he said. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a rescue. But something in this house shifted 3 degrees that afternoon. And Sloane felt it, because 2 weeks later she called the meeting. It was a Saturday, November 8th, 10 in the morning. I charted it. Sloane had made coffee and set out the Tart Place's cookies. Kyle Brantley was there in a golf shirt. Trevor was on the couch. Imani had been told to go to her friend Dija's, and had, instead, come home early, and was standing in the kitchen doorway where nobody noticed her. And Harold Ellis was on my porch, because I had asked him to be there at 10:15 and to knock loud. Kyle Brantley started. He used the words streamline and protect the asset, and at your age, God forbid something happens. He explained Medicaid's 5-year look-back like I hadn't sat with dying people and their terrified children for 4 decades. He slid the folder toward me. He'd already flagged the lines. Little pink arrows, 3 of them. Sloane said, "Vivian, this protects you." I said, "Sloane, does it?" Something in my tone. She heard it. She said, "Excuse me," I said, "you applied for a home equity line of credit in July, in my name." The room went so quiet I could hear the refrigerator. Kyle Brantley said, "There's a misunderstanding." I said, "It was denied." "Do you know why it was denied, Mr. Brantley?" "You do. You've known since July. And you came back into this house 3 more times anyway." And then, Sloane stood up out of that chair, like something spring-loaded, and every ounce of the pleasant thing she'd been wearing since June came off her face at once. "You have no idea what we have gone through," she screamed. "You sit in this house on $400,000 of equity, and you make cake. Trevor has been carrying you for 2 years. We clean up after you, we watch you, we manage you. You don't get to sit there and act like a victim. You're not." And she pointed at me, shaking, crying, magnificent in her fury. "You are a guest in this house now, Vivian. You're a guest, and guests don't get a vote." Nobody moved. Trevor had gone gray. I stood up. I did it slowly, because my knee is what it is, and because I wanted it to take a moment. I said, "Trevor, go get the drawer out of your father's desk." He said, "Ma, go get it." He went. We waited. 20 seconds is a very long time in a room like that. He came back holding it upside down, both hands, and I watched him read what was carved into the underside of the wood, and I watched him read it again, and I watched him sit down on the arm of the couch because his legs wouldn't hold him. V. Don't sign. Call Ruth. M. And that is when Harold Ellis knocked. And Imani opened the door, and Ruth Delgado walked into my living room with a briefcase and did not take off her coat. Kyle Brantley knew who she was. I watched him figure it out. And I watched the color leave his face, and I will not pretend that I didn't enjoy it. I'm 71. I've earned 1 or 2 things. Ruth sat down without being invited. She opened the briefcase, and she did it slow. "Mr. Brantley," she said, "you're the loan officer on a July application that used Mrs. Carter's social security number. I have the denial letter. I have the underwriting notes. I have the reason for denial in your own file." He said, "I think I should go." "You should stay," Ruth said. "You'll find this professionally relevant." Then she turned to Trevor, not to Sloane. To Trevor. "The property at 1114 Bellhaven Street is owned by the Carter Family Irrevocable Trust, established in 2018 by your father. Your mother is the lifetime beneficiary." She laid a page on the coffee table. "She has the absolute right to live here until she dies." Another page. "She cannot sell it. She cannot borrow against it." Another page. "Neither can you." Another. "No power of attorney can override it, because a power of attorney conveys your mother's authority, and your mother has no authority to convey." She looked at Sloane for the first time. "Your entire plan required a signature from a woman who has not legally been able to give one for 5 years. Sloane said, very fast, "She's not competent. She's been declining for a year. Everybody in this house knows it. She hides things. She forgets." And Ruth said, "I wondered when we'd get here." She took out a manila envelope. 3 cognitive evaluations. April, July, October. Signed by Patrice Okafor, MD, full scores, full capacity. Independently administered, dated, and repeated. Because a single test proves a day, and 3 tests prove a year. Sloane looked at those pages. Then she looked at me, and I think it was the first time she ever really saw me, and what she saw was not a confused old woman. She saw a charge nurse. "You planned this," she whispered. "No," I said. "Marcus planned it. In 2018, sitting in a shop you turned into a gym." Then Harold Ellis, standing in my doorway with his hat in his hand, said, "Can I say something?" He couldn't see the room. He faced the wrong direction the whole time. It didn't matter. She asked me what this house would sell for. Twice. In July. He turned his face slowly. I heard the truck come for the tools on the 26th of June, about 4 in the afternoon. I heard the boy, Trevor. I heard him say sorry to the driver. Sorry. Like a man apologizing to a stranger for something he was doing to his daddy. Trevor made a sound. And then my granddaughter, 16 years old, stepped out of the kitchen doorway. I pulled Grandma's credit report, Imani said. The whole room turned. For personal finance class. Mr. Okonkwo made us pull our own, and I asked Grandma if I could practice on hers, and she said yes. Her chin was shaking, but her voice wasn't. The application had my mom's cell phone number on it. Not Grandma's. Mom's. Sloane said. Imani. You told me she was sick. My granddaughter was crying now, and she kept going anyway, which is a thing I will be proud of until the day they put me in the ground. You told me she was getting confused and that's why we had to help her. And I believed you. I watched her come down those stairs for 6 months thinking she was dying, and I never asked her. Nobody ever asked her. Nobody ever asked her. Trevor stood up. He didn't yell. My son has his father's face, and in that moment he had his father's stillness too. He said, Sloane, you weren't laid off. Silence. Say it. And she broke. All at once, the way a dam does, not gradually. There had been an internal audit. There had been a personal loan she'd moved around. There had been an investment in a short-term rental portfolio down in Brunswick that she had funded, in part, with a home equity line on the house in Pooler that Trevor's name was also on. That Trevor had never seen a statement for, because she handled the money, because she had always handled the money, because she was the one who wore blazers to the grocery store. $216,000. Trevor sat back down. He said, We're not underwater on Pooler. You said we sold it because the market was good. She didn't answer. He said, Sloane, where's my daughter's college money? She didn't answer that either. And the sound Imani made is not something I will write down. Later, much later, after Ruth left and after the police report, and after the long ugly business with the Georgia Department of Banking and Finance, which is still not finished, I asked Trevor if his sister had known. He said, Denise called me in August. She said something felt off about how Sloane talked about you. And? He looked at his hands. And I told her she was being dramatic, and she let it go. He shook his head slowly. Ma, she let it go because if the house ever got sold, she was gonna be in the will too. She never said that. She didn't have to. I heard it. Silence is a kind of vote. It has always been a kind of vote. Sloane moved out in December. Trevor moved out in January, which was not what I expected and not what I wanted, and it is the reason I'm the woman I am today instead of the woman I was. He came to me in the den with a duffel bag in his hand and he said, Ma, I can't stay here. I said, This is your home, and he said, It was. And then I let a woman turn it into a property, and I can't fix that from inside it. I begged him. I'm not proud of it. I stood in the doorway of the room they'd moved me into, and I begged my 42-year-old son not to leave. And he put his hand on my face and he said, I need to owe you nothing, just for a while. I need to come here for no reason. He was crying. Do you understand? I need to come here for no reason. I said I understood, and I lied, and then over the next 4 months it became true. He got a 2-bedroom in Garden City. Imani stayed with him during the week and with me on weekends. In March a letter came in the mail, handwritten, 9 pages, from my son. There was no apology in the first 8 pages. It was just the truth, laid out the way his father would have laid out lumber. What he did, when he did it, what he told himself, and why the telling was a lie. The apology was on page 9. And it was 2 sentences long, and I have it in the drawer with the lock of his baby hair. The tools came back, most of them. Harold Ellis tracked down 4 buyers himself over the phone, which nearly killed me to watch. A man in Rincon wouldn't sell the no. 4 back at any price, until Trevor drove out there and told him whose it had been, and then the man wouldn't take money for it. We opened the shop again on a Saturday in April. I want to tell you what that looked like, because it's the last thing. Trevor set up 2 sawhorses. Imani wore Marcus's apron, which came down to her shins. He put her hands on that little block plane. the one from when he was 9. And he stood behind her the way his father stood behind him. And he said, "Not so hard. Let the tool do it." And a shaving came off in one long curl and dropped onto the concrete. She picked it up. Of course she did. I sat in the doorway in a lawn chair, in the shade, with the gnats and the smell of cedar and my husband's handwriting in the drawer upstairs, and I did not say one word about what any of it had cost. Here's what I learned, and I'll be brief. Because I've kept you long enough. Love without respect isn't love. It's management. And you can be managed by someone who genuinely believes they're helping you, which is the most dangerous kind, because you can't get angry at them without feeling like a monster. Sacrifice you keep a ledger of stops being a gift. It becomes a debt, and children can feel the interest accruing, and some of them will spend their whole lives trying to pay it, and some of them will finally just declare bankruptcy on you. I did that to my son. Sloane didn't put that crack in us. She just found it and slid a wedge in. And here's the practical thing. The thing I'd say to every woman my age listening to this while she folds laundry. My husband loved me, and he still did not trust that love would be enough to protect me. So he went to a lawyer and an accountant, and he built something that would hold after his hands were gone. Freeze your credit. It's free, and it takes 20 minutes. Pull your report once a year. Ask somebody you trust, and I mean somebody who is not going to inherit anything, about a trust, about a will, about what a power of attorney actually does and does not do. Go to your own attorney, in your own state, not to a story on the internet. And then, if it's right for you, do it quietly and don't announce it at Thanksgiving. Not because your children are thieves. Mine wasn't. Because love should never have to be the only lock on the door. I forgave Trevor. It took a year, and forgiving him did not mean pretending. He knows what he did. He knows I know. We have Sunday dinner, and there's a plane on the pegboard, and neither of us mentions the tarp beside the AC unit. And that's not because we've forgotten. It's because we've decided. Sloane, I have not forgiven, and I've stopped apologizing for that. Some things you set down without dressing them up as grace. If you'd been in my kitchen that Saturday, would you have let your son come back? Or would you have closed that door for good? Tell me honestly in the comments. I've been arguing with myself about it for 2 years, and I still don't know. And if this story meant something to you, please like it and subscribe. Because there are women watching this at 2 in the morning who think they're the only one this ever happened to. And they aren't. Tell me where you're watching from, and what time it is where you are. Marcus used to say the fire never touched the bones. He was talking about the house. I've decided he was talking about me.